guys, this is Judy from Patterns for Pirates, and now that Alex has showed you how to shorten your zippers, I'm going to walk you through how to attach it with our zipper chin guard. So here is my zipper chin guard ready. I have cut it out, ironed it to a very lightweight fusible interfacing. This keeps it from stretching out, which is very important since your zipper doesn't stretch. If you don't interface this, it might end up growing as you're pinning and stitching, and the zipper will not at all. So you'll end up with a little bit of a wonky seam and wonky zipper guard. Don't want that. So use a lightweight interfacing. 1/4 inch seam allowance on the bottom and the top, and fold it right sides out and give it a really nice press. You can top stitch along the bottom and the fold and the top if you prefer. I did it on this one. What you're going to do is grab your zipper with the pull. I prefer to put the zipper guard with the side with the pull. I feel like it protects your chin a little bit better with the chin piece if you put it on the side with the pull. Most of my zippers that I have, the pull is on the wearer's right side, but I have bought zippers where it is on the wearer's left side, and it doesn't make any difference. It doesn't mean it's for a male or female or anything like that. Just random. So, to pin it in place, I'm going to put my zip guard with the fold on top and the raw edges on the bottom. I'm going to grab my zipper and I'm going to put the plain side down with the raw edges and the teeth and the pull up with the fold. And I'm going to line all the raw edges. The bottom stop should be completely flush with the bottom of your zipper guard. So I'm just going to continue to pin along the raw edges of my zipper guard. Since I interfaced, I don't have to really worry about accidentally stretching my zipper guard. It shouldn't stretch, but of course still be careful. Make sure that it's not moving around since it is well, I chose to use knit. You can use a woven fabric for the zipper guard if you have one that matches and looks good. Most of the time I end up using knit since the jacket is knit, but you might have a cord knit. So here it is flush at the bottom, and it extends about 1 inch from the zipper on the top. And what you're going to do is fold it over, and that is a little piece that will protect the chin from the zip hitting your chin if you have it zipped all the way up, and the zipper won't rub your chin or your little one's chin. So all I'm going to do is take out this top pin and just re-pin it with that folded on top. If you left some tail, I heat sealed my zipper so there's no tail, but if you left some tail, sometimes I'll leave a little tail, all you're going to do is fold it to the back. If you fold it to the back, it won't be seen, it won't bother the zipper. So you'll fold the tail back and then the zipper guard to the front. If you're like me with no tail, then you don't have to worry about that. Okay, so now I'm going to baste these together. This is a step that if you're a really proficient sewer, you might be able to skip. But, you know, a baste only takes a second. And it makes the next steps easier, so you're not worrying about holding so many layers together. I find that it really saves me time in the end because I'm not fiddling around trying to keep all the layers together on the next step. And it looks like my machine got tired of sewing through lots of thick fabric, which what I was doing right before this, and has squeezed my needle out, but just stick that back in there. See, this is why a baste is so good too, because things like that can always happen, and since it's just a baste, it's not going to hurt anything. You know, that's not something that's super frustrating when if you go straight into it, that might have been some seam ripping happening there. And what I like to do is actually I unfolded that and I'll baste the zipper on without it being folded, just to make sure I have it perfectly nice, and then I'll fold it over and I'm going to baste only that teeny tiny overlap, which is, it should be about an inch. Depending on how thick your fabric is, it might be a little bit less than an inch after the bulk of the fold. So now I have my guard and my zipper basted together, and it's time for me to attach both of those to my jacket piece. Here's my jacket. Again, I'm working on the wear's right side, so I'm going to grab the wear's right side. I already have a little knit interfacing along the front. It's about 3/4 of an inch wide. You want it wide enough to stabilize your seam allowance, but not quite so wide that after you fold it back, you can see it. So about 1/2 inch to 3/4 is the sweet spot for our seam allowance. So I have my jacket right sides up, and I have my zipper, and I'm going to place it right side down. So right sides together like we generally sew. I also have, and you know what, it's a really dark zipper, so it's hard to see. I'll mark it with a pen so you can see it. I have 2 markings on my zipper, well actually just one on this one, where my waistband is. So I marked that on both sides where my waistband seam is, so that when I zip up my jacket, I'm 100% sure, well, let's say 98% sure, that when I zip up my jacket, my seam at my waistband will line up, and you're going to want to do that for anything you want to align. So waistband, kangaroo pockets, the neckline, of course the neck, I'm doing the bomber neckline, and so the very top is where the neckline aligns, but if you're doing the hood version, you'll want to mark the neckline and then the hood extends. So you'll mark the neckline, any pockets that you did, and the waistband on both sides of the zipper. You want to mark it with your zipper zipped up and make sure that those spots align on your zipper. Okay, so right side's up here, and I'm going to put my zipper teeth down so that the 2 pieces that I'm stitching together are right sides together. And as you can see, since I interfaced everything, nothing's stretching out, my marked point is lining up perfectly with my seam right there that I need it to. And I always like to pin at all my marked points first. Nothing should stretch, but you know what? It's just easier to make sure all those marked points are perfectly aligned before you start pinning anything else, because those are the most important to be happy with your zipper. And so since everything's interfaced, nothing's going to stretch, it should be an exact match from the very top to the very bottom. You shouldn't need to ease anything, you shouldn't need to stretch anything. Now, if you missed a seam allowance, you got a little too big, a little too small, anywhere on the jacket, that can throw off your length a little bit. And all you want to do is make sure that it's exactly the same. And if your zipper guard's a little long, you can go back and shave a tiny bit off, taking a bigger seam allowance here. If it's a little short, you can double check your seam allowances on your waistband and your neckline. Make sure you took your full seam allowances so that everything lines up for you. Alright, again, I'm just going to baste this on and make sure that I have it exactly how I want it. You don't want to take a full 1/2 inch seam allowance here like we usually sew with P4P patterns. And that's because if you do, you'll be right on top of your zipper teeth, which you obviously don't want to sew right on top of your zipper teeth. Somewhere between 1/4 inch and 3/8 is what you want. You can take up to a full 3/8, and that way when you turn, your fabric will be your seam line will be pretty close to your zipper teeth. If you take any bigger, you might have a hard time getting your zipper pull up and down because it will be too close to your zipper pull and teeth. When I baste, I usually take just 1/4 inch. And then when I sew my final stitch, I usually take a 3/8. I'm just making sure everything's aligned. Again, my zipper guard and my zipper are basted, so I'm really just checking that my zipper guard is aligned perfectly with my edge. Now I'm getting down here close to the pull, and all I'm gonna do is zip past it. That's it. Since I'm doing a 1/4 inch seam allowance, my foot isn't close enough to really hinder the zipper pulling past it at all. Zippers really aren't that scary, guys. If you baste and you double check everything, they're really not that scary. And as you can see, I've got quite a bit of room between my seam line and my zipper teeth. So when I take my, that's perfectly fine if you leave it at 1/4 inch. You'll just have a little bit bigger gap right there between your zipper teeth and your fabric. When I take my final stitch, I like to take a 3/8, so it's just a tiny bit closer and that gap is a tiny bit smaller. So I'm going to do my other side. Where's my other zip? There it is. And you do the other side the same. There's no zip guard on this side. Okay. And no zip pull on this side, so it's a little bit easier. I'll mark I have that one mark right here for the waistband to make sure when I zip it up, it matches perfectly with the other side. And if you forgot to do that, you can go ahead and throw your zip back on here at any time. So if you forgot to do that when you're cutting it out. So here it is zipped up. You can mark it with a marking pen or anything. You just want that seam right here. And you just mark that. So that when it zips up, these teeth are in the exact right spot. Because you know that's something that can really bother people doing zippers. And it's one of the only things that can be obvious to someone that isn't a seamstress. When like pockets don't align and things like that, it looks a little wonky. So again, right sides together. My zipper teeth down. And I'm just going to make sure that marked point matches and the very top matches. And then I'm just going to continue to pin the rest of the way. Again, it should be a perfect match. I have the strip of interfacing on the front side of my bodice, my jacket. There we go. So I'm pinned the top at the neckline, the bottom right at that seam, and then the bottom is flush with the bottom. And I'm just going to baste. Oop. Got stuck in that little plastic part at the very bottom. Again, I'm just going to use a small 1/4 inch seam allowance here for my baste. This one's a little bit easier since you're only sewing a zip with no pull. You don't have to remember to move your pull, and no zipper guard either. Now here's the moment of truth when you can zip up both your sides and make sure that you're happy with everything. Make sure that the bottoms are flush on both sides. The top is flush on both sides. And that your waistband pieces are aligning. If you did pockets, your pockets are aligning. I actually cut out pockets for this guy and I forgot to do it when I was putting it together, and my little guy's gonna probably be pretty sad that there's no pockets. So mine all aligned. I'm gonna go back and do my final stitch, and this is where you can, if you would like, to finish the inside. And I'm gonna grab some single fold bias tape, and I picked up at Joann's, and I'm going to change my thread color. I love to baste in a contrasting thread color because then when it's time to pull it out, it's really easy to pull out. But now I'm going to use one that matches, since it's my final stitch. Now Now I'm not going to measure out my single fold bias tape. You can. I'm just going to sew it, and when I get to the bottom, trim it. But you can measure it out and get the right amount right up at the very, very beginning. You're going to want to leave a little extra at the top to fold under. I like to leave about a thumb's worth to fold over. I don't like to skimp on that too much because I just find it frustrating later on if there's not enough to fold over. Now, when you're doing a pretty finish on the inside, you're going to unfold your bias tape and you're going to want to stitch along that first crease. Store-bought only has about a 1/4 inch, and I'm going to be doing a 3/8. You can leave it at a 1/4 inch if you're more comfortable with that. I prefer to do it at 3/8. So I'm just going to set my bias tape about 1/8 away from the edge as I'm sewing. Now that you're doing your final stitch, don't forget to back stitch at your front, at your top and bottom. I'm just using a straight stitch also. I didn't mention that earlier. I am sewing a knit, but this knit will not be stretching on this part. The zipper does not stretch, so this section of the jacket will not be stretching at all. So my seams should not pop. Okay. Again, if you're a beginner, you can cut this exactly to size and pin it on before. I'm going to move my zipper pull. If it's a little bit tight moving, you can always move your foot up and down, but you want to leave your needle down when you pull your zipper pull through, or your stitches might skip a little bit. This step really isn't necessary. It's just if you would like a beautiful inside as well. So again, I'm going to leave some extra to fold under at the bottom because our bottom and our top are already finished. So left about, 1/2 inch to 1/4 inch. And now when this folds back now, I still have a little room for my zipper pull and zipper teeth. And my single fold bias is going to fold right along that crease, and it's going to cover up my seam allowance right there. See, there's my seam allowance. Now it just covers it. So if you want to be extra safe and careful, you don't want any of it peeking out, you can use a small sharp scissors and trim your seam allowance down just a little bit so that you make sure none of it is going to peek out. And I tend to do this more with thicker fabrics. I'm using French terry for the body, and I used a French terry for the zipper guard, which really isn't recommended. I did something that I tell you guys not to do. The zipper guard, when you use a thicker fabric, can make it a little more difficult to sew. So we really recommend using a lighter weight fabric for the zipper guard. But I really wanted this French terry. I knew my machine could make it through. So I'm only trimming a tiny bit off with my little side sharp scissors. There we go. That's just going to make sure that nothing peeks out. Okay. So now when I fold everything back, the inside, this bias tape will fold and it will cover up that seam allowance. There you go. And your top, you just fold over. So you'll fold over the seam allowance. And when you fold it over, should be right around that neckline. Now this is something that I really take my time with. I'll pin it. Because if you're going to take the time to make the inside pretty, you really want it to be flawless. If you're not worried about it, which, you know, if it's a kid's jacket, they're only going to wear it one season, they grow so fast. There is no shame in not finishing the inside. Tons of store-bought jackets don't finish the inside. But the way I like to do it is I pin all the way down, and once again I'll baste it. I'll baste it from the inside, and again it's really helpful if you use a contrasting color. And then I'm going to turn it and I'm going to check it. Make sure it's beautiful on the inside, beautiful on the outside. And then I take my final stitch from the top side in a matching color. Again, it's an extra step, but it's a way to make sure that extra time you're taking to finish it looks really nice on the bottom and the top. Basting it in a contrasting color right here is going to really help you when you're sewing it from the top. You're going to know exactly where you want it to stitch to make sure you're catching your single fold bias tape, and you're going to make sure that it's even top stitch, and you can clearly see the pull to pull it out of the way. So that's how I do it. Might take an extra step basting from the wrong side, but it saves me trouble in the end. I'm not seam ripping. So, and then the other side would be the same. You would just take your single fold bias tape, put it a little bit away from the edge, sew it with your 3/8 seam allowance, and it will cover the inside. And I do the same thing, basting with a contrasting thread, and then doing it with a matching final stitch from the top side. And then you just pull out that contrasting thread and you're done. I hope you guys are a little less scared of zippers. Separating zippers are really the easier option to start with, I think. Not that other zippers are not easy, but I do think separating zippers are easy because you can do one side at a time. Alright guys, good luck and let us know if you have any questions.